and the committee's able to
So
review that, and we have differences,
the goal with,
does it happen that we get a vote?
I was speaking and you interrupted
It's
me.
the same question
No,
I'm asking,
it's not.
Counselor.
You have to allow me to finish.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of 781 News Debrief. I'm your host, Jamie Herkelly. I'm joined tonight with Tom and with Saul.
Hi.
And we were here to talk about some of the goings-on in City Council last month, primarily housing and traffic related. Tom, do you want to tell us a bit about the Veterans Preference Ordinance?
Yeah, so this is another hand-me-down from the Affordable Homes Act, which is the big housing omnibus bill that the State House passed in like July, August of this year. And one of the many things that this law did is that it allows for cities and towns to implement a veterans preference in their inclusionary zoning ordinances, which is to say that today in Waltham, if anyone builds multifamily housing, which is 10 or more units large, then 15 to 20% of those units will be affordable. They'll be income restricted and only rented out. Yeah, so they'll be price capped and income restricted. Of those affordable units built, 10% of those units can have veterans preference, which is to say that it's not like these units are set aside and held empty until a veteran comes along. It's simply where for this unit, veterans, there's a very large line of people in Massachusetts who need housing. And for these veterans preference units, veterans are at the front of the line. Developer must do their due diligence to offer this affordable housing to veterans before they can offer it to the broader community. So, in summary, if you have a 100-unit development in Waltham, 20% of those units would be affordable, and of those 20 affordable units, 10% of them could be set aside for veterans preference, which is to say a 100-unit building would have 2 veterans preference units. And which means if Waltham, it is very good that Waltham has this veterans preference policy. It's very good for veterans. But it's only on paper, and practically the only thing that actually matters is whether you're actually housing veterans, whether you're actually producing this housing they need. And what that means is that this is great on paper, but if Waltham wants to actually house veterans, they need to change their zoning ordinance to actually allow 50+ unit buildings to be constructed. Because importantly, if you don't know, Waltham zoning code makes it pretty much illegal to build anything other than $2 million McMansions or $1 million duplexes, none of which are affected by inclusionary zoning. Every once in a while, or in the 2010s, there was this brief period where City Council was very based, and they did permit a few multifamily developments, transit-oriented, that were, larger than 50 units per building. And, if Waltham decides to start doing more of that, then we get some veterans preference housing. But the fact of the matter is, this is a great first step, but if Waltham City Councilors actually want to house these veterans to have this veterans preference take effect, Waltham is going to have to start legalizing a lot more 50+ unit developments. That can be done through compliance with the MBTA Communities Act for whenever Waltham passes their final zoning to comply with that. They're still currently waiting on feedback from the state as to whether their current policy is acceptable or not. Could also be done through any rezoning, the comprehensive zoning review that's happening this upcoming year, where Waltham is bringing in a consultant to completely review and update our zoning code. That's another opportunity to permit this multifamily housing. But fundamentally, we have this option for veterans preference housing. It applies to 10% of affordable units in inclusionary zoning, and inclusionary zoning units are in part only 10 to 20% of the total units of the building. Just to say, veterans preference housing is only maximum 2% of any development. Just say, if you want veterans preference housing, Waltham actually has to follow through and actually permit and allow for 50+ unit buildings to be built. All the current 50+ unit buildings being built in Waltham today are thanks to 40B, which is a state override. And Waltham, as of October 2024, Waltham is now exempt from permitting more 40B, which is to say, Waltham will not be able to build any veterans housing through 40B in the near future. If Waltham wants to build veterans housing, they're going to have to actually legalize multifamily development.
Part of the interesting timing for this that I observed was that they were bringing this up after in the context of them doing the MBTA Communities Act rezoning. And the overlay district for that is only really for 4 families with 8 parking spaces in that overlay district. So none of those would be, affected.
Yeah, like it's not impossible that a developer will buy a huge lot of land, plop down a bunch of tall, skinny fourplexes in a sea of parking, and then not do lot splits. That way it counts as one 50+ unit development. But it's not likely. And Waltham's law department did zone like that because they were trying to do it, to where multifamily development was unlikely.
The veterans preference thing, if they ever did zone for that, makes it less is another hurdle that a big thing like that would then have to go through too. So ironically, it kind of serves the opposite purpose.
Yeah, no. Waltham is very much currently trying to, self-sabotage MBTA Communities Act while patting themselves on the back with this veterans preference. But with that being said, veterans preference, I should specify, is not law yet. It's been something that has been discussed and drafted by the law department. It will now go to City Council, Committee of the Whole. Committee of the Whole will schedule a public hearing, so be on the lookout for that sometime next month. And then after the public hearing, which I encourage people to go to and speak at, for this veterans preference zoning amendment, then City Council will be allowed to vote affirmatively or negatively in regards to whether this veterans preference should become law. Because it is a zoning amendment, and that is the process for all zoning amendments. Come up with the zoning, board and survey planning gives their opinions on it, hold a public hearing, board and survey planning gives more opinions on it, and then City Council is allowed to vote on whether the zoning happens or not.
Thank you, Tom. And on ADUs?
Okay, yeah. So after veterans preference, the other thing that was discussed in ordinance and rules, or another thing that was discussed in ordinance and rules, was accessory dwelling units, ADUs, granny flats, in-laws apartments, casitas. They're all a bunch of terms for the same thing, which is just a small house, either attached to a single family home or detached in the backyard of a single family home. It can be up to 900 square feet or up to half the size of the single family home on that lot, which is to say they are small, relatively affordable. And before today, as of today, there are a ton of regulations in Waltham that makes it not impossible, but next to impossible to build ADUs in single family neighborhoods. For one thing, it has to happen in only RA1 and RA1 and RA2 zoning districts, which are to say they have to be on single family homes in single family neighborhoods where the lots are above 15,000 and 20,000 square feet. And I know most people don't know what that looks like spatially, but it looks larger than 90% of single family homes. Like this, currently in Waltham, ADUs can apply to a diminishingly small number of lots. The status quo is it's very difficult, if not impossible, to build ADUs in Waltham. But starting February 2nd, once again, thanks to the state passing the Affordable Homes Act, the Housing Bond Bill, starting February 2nd, 2025, ADUs will be legal to be built by right in all single family neighborhoods in Waltham, meaning you don't have to go in front of City Council, you don't have to meet all these crazy requirements. You just have to say, hey, I want to build an ADU, and hey, I own this single family home, let me build an ADU. The only thing to be said is that Waltham does have the right to impose quote unquote reasonable dimensional requirements on ADUs. And it sounds like the way Waltham wants to impose those reasonable dimensional requirements is just to make sure ADUs fit the underlying zoning, which is to say in most single family neighborhoods today, you have to have a 15 to 30 foot setback in the front of your lot between the street and the house. You have to have somewhere between 10 and 30 feet side setbacks and somewhere between 20 and 40 feet backyard setbacks, depending on what zoning district you're in. So those restrictions will apply. You can't build ADUs too close to other people's properties. But I think really that's the only dimensional requirement the city wants to apply to ADUs, which is very nice. In addition, the city has, or city councilors in the ordinance and rules meeting also said they intend to create a special permit process to allow to discretionarily allow on a case-by-case basis single-family homeowners to also build a second ADU on their property. And this is all really good. Historically, you show up to a city council meeting where they're discussed housing, and there's a lot of anti-housing sentiment. There's a lot of outrage against the state. There's a lot of misinformation. And honestly, at this ordinance and rules meeting, there was not any of that. It was a very straightforward discussion of what the state requires and how the city is going to comply with the state requirements, such that ADUs can be built anywhere in Waltham starting February 2nd, 2025. So it was just nice to be able to listen to that housing discussion in city council without, pacing back and forth wanting to tear my hair out. It's really wonderful to see city councilors starting to take this more seriously. It's not like city councilors were gung-ho, like, yes, we can finally build ADUs, because if they wanted that, they would have done it already. And there was no enthusiasm from any of the councilors. They didn't really see this as an opportunity to really expand housing options in Waltham, even though that is something worth being excited about. But they're not blocking it, and they're not trying to stand in the way, that they're not being outraged by it. And that is a huge leap forward, I think, for the city council. I think it's good news, and it bodes well for future housing action and future reform.
Thank you, Tom. And there is a bit of a reservation city councilors do have to having more ADUs just because it is increased density. And I have a clip here of when they first do the first reading of what the current rules are and what the new rules are going to be. One of the comments is, not all hope is lost, because they can still apply restrictions to how ADUs are constructed.
So what is in here that we have to change? And it's quite a few things. So number one, we cannot have a special permit requirement for ADUs, or at least for the first ADU to be constructed in a single family unit. If we allow more than one ADU, you can have a special permit process for ADUs beyond that first one. There cannot be an owner occupancy requirement or a minimum period of ownership for the principal dwelling. You cannot expressly limit the occupancy number. We cannot restrict whether there is any alteration to the exterior of the dwelling like we do currently. We cannot preclude an increase in the floor area of the dwelling. You cannot limit ADUs to single family dwellings that existed at the time that the statute was passed or our ordinance was amended. You cannot require approval or recertification of approval, and you cannot make the approval non-transferable. Don't lose hope yet. What can we add? So,
Oh, hope is
here
not
we go.
lost. Hope is not
all
lost.
lost.
No,
Here's
no.
what we can do.
All right.
In the current zoning, allowed areas that are for single family homes that can do ADUs, it's in this residence A1 and A2 districts, which are this bright yellow district, which is covering basically the area right by the 128 outcropping into the reservoir, and a few areas kind of on the far side by Weston. And the RA2 is just a big chunk kind of along 128 and in the central area by the lanes and Chesterbrook, but then nowhere else in the residence A zoned areas other than a little chunk over here by the border basically with Lexington. And it's kind of randomly distributed and not very clear. And one of the major changes is that all RA zoned areas, I think, are going to be now eligible for ADUs. That includes the area by Cedarwood, Highlands, Warrendale, Leechery that weren't already zoned for it. So it could be major changes on the road.
And it was unclear from the ordinance and rules meeting, but it sounds like, based on the way city council drafts their ADU ordinance, ADUs may also be permitted anywhere there's a single family home.
Which could be RB
also
too.
in RB, RC zoning districts. That's not to say that really adds to the density, because in those districts you could always build a duplex in the first place anyway. But it's just more flexible ways in how you can add a housing unit to someone's property, and more flexibility is nice. And I will say one other thing, just this isn't necessarily talking about ADUs anymore, but it's talking about counselors' attitudes and knowledge of zoning laws. Because there was this one interesting thing where during the meeting, Counselor Robert Logan from Ward 9 talked about setbacks and what does and doesn't make a place where people want to live. And this was just really interesting because Robert Logan is not anti-housing by any stretch of the imagination, at least when compared to other Waltham city councilors. He is very pro-housing. He talks about affordability and wanting to increase housing supply, which is very different from most of Waltham's government. But even he had this moment, and maybe we can clip it in if it's easy to clip, where he says essentially, we want to make sure we impose these setback requirements on ADUs because no one in a single family home, wants someone living, 5 feet from the property line. And that, even though there are places like in that Waltham that currently exist, that's not what people want. That's not what we should be doing moving forward. It was just really interesting because people always treat, these, exceptions of Waltham's dense character of how, homes are close to lot lines as exceptions that no one wants, as if they're not the rule or really common. But homes 5 feet from the lot line are incredibly common in Waltham. It's hard to overstate the degree to which, Waltham zoning code makes it illegal to build residences 5 feet or closer to other people's lot lines. That normally requires 10 or 15 or 20-foot setbacks. But all of Waltham's neighborhoods have homes that are 5 feet from their neighbors. And this includes in single family neighborhoods. Obviously in the multifamily neighborhoods in the South Side, you have a lot of distance housing. I live in a neighborhood where there's a lot of homes close to one another. Robert Logan, who lives on the South Side, right across the street from him, there are a bunch of multifamily homes that are 5 feet or fewer from each other's lot lines. But in single family neighborhoods as well, even just looking at counselors, once again, Counselor Colleen Bradley MacArthur, Counselor John McLaughlin, Counselor Kathleen McMiniman, who's the biggest NIMBY on city council, Counselor Kathy Ann Harris, Counselor Sean Durkee, and it's cutting close, I can't tell for sure, but I think also Counselor Vidal. All of these people live in single family homes with their houses being less than 10 feet, being 5 to 10 feet from their neighbors' lot lines. And it's just really interesting psychology. It's permeated throughout all city government and a lot in city discourse as well, where it's oh, we don't want dense housing. We don't want people living close to each other. When that's the way they're living today, why is there this fear from allowing homes to be built the way they used to be built? Why is there this fear with homes being built in a way that we currently live? It's just something worth thinking about, worth discussing, because there is this huge divide between the way Waltham exists today and the way city councilors universally speak as if us living that way would be a terrible thing that no one wants.
Thank you, Tom. I had one other thing to talk about related to ordinance and rules, and it's part of the reason for this is why the things we were just discussing were happening at the end of ordinance and rules, and it's because there was several special permits in it ended up making the whole meeting. So rules and ordinances ended up being over 3.5 hours long, and a number of the developers were getting their special permits reviewed first, and the items that are referring to the broader public interest came up last. That's not to say that the things that came up under the developers weren't of public interest. And one of the things I wanted to bring up was that sort of a road that runs parallel to the 128. So this is Fifth Ave, and one of the properties that was there last night was 425 Fifth Ave, which you can see under construction here in the satellite image. And they also own this property over at 460 Totten Pond Road, which I can show you on here. has like a connection to Totten Pond Road that has been used for an access road. And one of the things that they had been getting pushback from was that there was going to be a connection made to Prospect Hill Lane, from what I understood. And like that's something that could affect the broader traffic flow, despite the fact that it's just a thing for this property here. And I'm not clear on the entire history of why this decision was made. I didn't have a chance to follow up with the developer, but that was sort of one of the things that was sort of, it sounded like it was throwing a wrench in things in them having their thing processed, was sort of the going back and forth with the law department on these types of questions. And I'll put in a clip here of then the same sort of owner was on the hook for access for questions related to 245, which is just up on 5th. And they are apparently waiting on a certificate of occupancy for this. And here I have a clip.
We've been asked to explain things, which we've done, but also there are things that in the normal course of the building and the give and take between the general contractor who's here, the architects, the engineers, all of who are here tonight can answer any questions, and we were asked to bring them in order to be able to do this. We're surprised that it's now going to be sent back again, because we thought we'd come here and be able to get a vote.
So,
that's what our expectation was.
And
but in this case, we're being told that there's not a vote. It's now going to go back to the law department.
Yeah,
and so the law department could issue an opinion.
If I may,
can you allow me to finish?
But you're factually incorrect. Okay, we received this before the committee dated October 17th.
Right,
you filed
Thursday
it on
we
the
filed
17th.
it. Right.
Today is Monday. We have a weekend, and
Right.
this material was sent to the law department. But Attorney Azadi.
That has not been. It hasn't.
This has not been sent to the law department. So this needs to go to the law department. This is one of these filings that needs to go to the law department. The reason why Attorney Azadi is here tonight is to begin the expression of her opinion through the committee and here. This document she hasn't even had a chance to review.
But it's responsive to the questions that were previously raised, and we can go over them tonight for the committee. I mean, I think they're all written in common sense, and especially about requiring us to submit special permits in the zoning. I mean, previously we've had a modification here. This building was modified. The whole address was the subject of a modification in order to clear the whole issue up about front side yard. And that was one thing that we were able to get voted on. But here, that's again another issue that's being brought up. And these issues continue to be brought up, yet guess what? They're all going to be taken care of when you go in front of the building department in order to get a certificate of occupancy. That's where there are any differences, and if something is not right with the building department, it'll be sent back here for an amendment. But since for decades we've used 3.551, and for decades they haven't had to go to the law department, if they've in fact been made and they were disclosed, there's no definition of minor. It says change in the ordinance. Why not allow the committee to vote on something where in fact a lot of these issues are better left to the specialist, the building department, and the engineer, who we've stayed in touch with and is aware of what we're doing.
So,
and we have a finished building.
Okay.
It's sitting there until we're able to get this thing
realize
permitted.
that, and I realize it's a goal for us to work through this. That's why we're all here.
So in that clip, they were talking about how this building has just been finished, sitting there, and they are waiting to get a tenant into it. And that's costing the owner / developer hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially in mortgage payments each month that this sits like this. And because this is like a multi-million-dollar development that they had to take out a big amount of money to develop in the first place. And this points to sort of issues with the streamlining of our process, where part of this whole process for getting these permits completed was sort of set to loop in the law department. And it seems like there's just some sort of growing pains here, because now after a summer session, you have these developers in expecting to get a sign off on this thing, only to find out that they're not. It's some other part of the process that they were not entirely clear of.
We filed it on Thursday.
Right, and 245 was, you filed it on Thursday, and it was just released to the attorney.
That was the second one.
Right, so at the beginning of this hearing, right, there's a lot of crosstalk and being able to keep track of kind of where we are. You filed we read, we released. She hadn't had time to review it, but she had reviewed things up to this beginning, and you guys haven't talked. So what I wanted to make sure that you had was an option to hear from Attorney Azadi directly what her concerns were. And she will read your opinion, but did you have any clarifying points before we
Yes,
table?
and I would
it would be important to address now.
Yes, I would refer to our response and wish to read that into evidence. Also, I hate to back up, but in response to Councilor Logan regarding the roadway, if I misspoke, I apologize, but I believe to say the private way, the driveway would be built according to engineering specs. We have not already had the approval of the engineer, but anything being built would be built according to the City of Waltham's engineering specs for that driveway. Secondly, as regards the responses that we provide you with for what Attorney Zadi has brought up have traditionally, and on 2 occasions now, both Councilor Logan and Attorney Azadi have talked about custom and policy. It is well settled law in Massachusetts. Custom and policy is the benefit for interpretation of zoning ordinances. It's relied on by all stakeholders, the municipalities, the state, the city. Custom and policy and what has been followed. In this case, Section 3.551, as I'm sure you know, Councilor, has been around for decades. And it's what the building inspector have pointed us to in order to be able to bring these minor modifications. The word minor modifications does not appear, as you stated, as Councilor Azadi has also stated. It does not appear that. But the custom and practice of this body, the City of Waltham, in order to have builders who spend hundreds of millions of dollars in the field where there are changes, is to make those aware of city officials. And in this case, by the way, any changes are done by a third-party engineering firm that gets sent to all departments. Any changes that are made traditionally have been brought up in terms of a minor modification. It does not fit squarely into 3.551, but it's something that this body has been doing for decades. It's something that prior building inspectors have advised us to do, and we've advised our clients to do. We have a building that's hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's finished, and it's costing my client hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we presented a minor modification. We have an opinion back. We respond to the opinions, and it's been over a month since we've been in here. We asked for a vote last time, and now we're responding again. To go back and forth and back and forth, I'm sure Mrs. Zadi and I can continue to disagree because we're offering you our opinions.
This is, and I'll have a picture here of just how many people were in the room at the time for this thing. It's not, it's expensive to get professionals in, especially late at night in the evening to these meetings, especially when you don't even know necessarily when the start time is, because these things don't have an announced start time. It's announced to happen after committee of the whole. So this meeting didn't start until after 8:30 and then ran until after midnight. And they have to take a vote to even extend the meeting beyond midnight. And it just sort of makes everything feel rather rushed when discussions that should be happening, like, and potentially sort of get crammed into the end when everyone's tired and not really interested in hearing things out. And these were the ones that happened before all of the ones that were related to, housing and things like that. Not that anything was really being deliberated in those, but it's still an interesting sort of thing because, in order to attend it and see those things, I have to wait through this 3.5-hour meeting. Very, very not ideal.
And also just to comment on that, the inefficiency of, the meeting schedule and how it goes super late past midnight all the time. It also should be said that ordinance and rules, as the name would imply, focuses on creating ordinances and rules, the laws through which city council operates and that the city abides by. Special permits technically don't have anything to do with ordinance and rules. Special permits just happen to go to ONR because those city councilors just have that knowledge and want to accumulate all that work. It is my personal opinion, and if anyone wants to reach out to his counselor as well, I think this is a good idea. There should be a there should be a separate special permit committee in city council. The one committee that acts semi-judicially in order to interpret laws and make rulings based on whether they should discretionarily approve or reject different developments. Then a separate committee that actually focuses on developing ordinances and developing rules for city council and city government writ large. These otherwise, these are two of the most like intensive jobs that city council currently has, creating rules for themselves and then discretionarily approving or rejecting developments. Each of them take like an hour plus every single week, starting at 8 p.m. as you said. And when those jobs can't be done in parallel, when they're done by the same people, the same one committee, reliably, these meetings always run so ridiculously long, and it's so hard to actually sit down and listen to what you care about in person, because if you care about the special permits, you know how long that's going to go on, and you don't even know when to show up, as you were saying. If you care about the ordinances and rules, then you have to wait even longer as well. Is there going to be special permit? Is this not? That literally changes whether you should show up at 10 p.m. to listen or midnight. So yeah, really just like inefficient way that city councils operate in this one specific manner. And there are also other downstream effects as well, which is, when you're acting in a semi-judicial manner, when you're making, discretionary judgments on whether developers are allowed to build or not, in that environment, anything you say about the special permit, whether it's on the record or not, could be used in the court of law to say whether you have, biases against the applicant or not. And because of that, you're not supposed to talk about special permits outside of the special permit process. And then Kathy and Harris has historically misinterpreted this rule to say, okay, well, we're acting in a semi-judicial way towards special permits, even though we're acting in a legislative way towards ordinances. I'm still going to pretend that no one's allowed to speak about ordinances unless they are lawyers speaking in front of this body. And it's not like, I don't think Kathy Ann Harris is lying. This is something she truly believes. It's something that is handed down from the mayor. The mayor may be acting in a more like bad faith way, but it's just another also downstream way where transparency is unfairly restricted, and it's unnecessarily harder to have a voice as a citizen in the happenings of city council, because city councilors and the mayor use this obscure terminology to pretend, or at least unknowingly put forward this false idea that city councilors aren't allowed to talk about ordinances outside of Ordinance and Rules Committee, which is wrong. So just a little aside and tangent that I wanted to talk about, because there are lots of downstream effects from special permits being handled by city council in this committee, both in a practical, time-consuming way and also in a technical, what is and isn't allowed to be discussed with constituents kind of way.
Also related to the practical impacts of this, one of the things that came up related to this was, do we really need to have all these printed copies in the submission? So these developers are having to print up color photocopies, like I think they were printing 20 of them of like the entire application, deed, everything for distribution to all of the counselors and all the department heads. And I mean, like, it's just things like that where it's just like, these are things that are expenses that are sort of tacked on to this whole process to make it take more time and more effort just to get through these types of things. They managed to squeak through that they would only need to print out copies for like I think 15 was the number they settled on, with like e-files set to the department heads. But
wasteful in so many ways. Yeah.
Yes. And it's not even, I mean, yeah. So that was kind of my observations on the committees for this month, and specifically on like the ones that are related to what is one of Waltham's largest revenue source, getting irritated with the committee at the process behaving differently than what they were used to, which is sort of how I would interpret this. And they're like, there's a bit of a heated exchange, which I'll include here, between the president of the committee and the one of the lawyers for the developer.
To be perfect, I don't agree, nor should you. You're treating this like a court of law, and honestly, you normally don't argue with the judge. I'm the chair of the committee, and I'm here to facilitate a discussion and a deliberation before a quasi-judicial board. This committee has read this opinion and requires the opinion of our law department. That was the request that was made the last time, and that needs to happen. Timely flow of this information needs to happen.
I'm only asking for process. If it comes back and we send our response to that, and the committee is able to review that, and we have differences, does it happen that we get a vote?
I was speaking and you interrupted me.
It's the same question I'm
No,
asking,
it's not.
Counselor.
You have to allow me to finish.
So,
and I will also say this isn't just like some novel idea that Jamie and I have looking at this, or like, oh wow, this process kind of sucks. Like, so many people think this process sucks. Like, as it has been shown, like we think it sucks. The developers think it sucks. City government officials also thinks it sucks. And with that in mind, like city government Waltham is trying to address these issues. This problem with how special permits happen, discretionary review, all of this is going to be a part of the comprehensive zoning review and update that Waltham has hired a consultant to perform over the next year. There is going to be a massive update of Waltham zoning code and how development is permitted in the city. And ideally, it will be a much less insane process 1 year from today. We'll see. It is something that is going to be addressed. So we may have more updates as the year rolls on and this comprehensive review and update of Waltham zoning code occurs.
Now with traffic commission updates, Saul, would you like to take it away?
So the traffic commission met last Thursday for their monthly meeting. This one was a lot shorter than the September one, which had all the items from the summer, since they don't meet over the summer. This meeting lasted about 2 hours. Most of it was pretty mundane stuff. It started with LeBlanc and Handley pretty much asking for permission for the homecoming parade, which is happening this coming Saturday, right before the Waltham Newton football game. It's kind of funny because the city had already publicized this like 3 weeks or so earlier on the website. The police department Facebook page had put it up, and like traffic engineer Garvin was basically like, you don't really need, you don't need permission from me to, or from traffic engineering to have a parade. So it was kind of like LeBlanc and Handley a bit showing off a bit with their convertibles and all the other vehicles. So we know that LeBlanc likes car parades, so that'll be this coming Saturday afternoon on Lexington Street to Leary Field. But most of the items were pretty mundane, pretty routine traffic commission stuff. But one thing we will go on, probably the item that occupied the most amount of time, they spoke for about 20 or so minutes on this. This was a follow-up to a neighborhood meeting that that Ward 8 Councilor Kathy Ann Harris held a few weeks ago on what date was it? I have it on October 9th. Yes, so 2 weeks ago. We did live stream that, and that is on the Channel 781 YouTube page. So this was a meeting that Councilor Harris held. There was a follow-up meeting to a meeting that was held earlier in the summer regarding Crescent Street. So pretty much Crescent Street going from Moody Street to Moody Street, ultimately, looping around past the watch factory, with typical concerns about speeding. This came up earlier in the traffic commission earlier in the year, where they had put up I think it was for 90 days, a speed radar sign to show drivers how fast they're going. And the 85th percentile speed was about 37 miles an hour. So again, what 85th percentile means, for those not familiar, it's just a standard traffic engineering metric that says 85% of drivers were going at that speed or less. It also means, conversely, that 15% of drivers, who are about 1 in 6, give or take, were going over 37 miles on Crescent Street. Keep in mind, too, the speed limit is the default, thickly settled speed limit that Waltham adopted a couple of years ago of 25 miles an hour. Crescent Street is pretty residential on the northern arc. It's entirely residential. The southern arc is the watch factory and parking lots, and a little more industrial. When rejoins Moody Street on Upper Moody Street. But either way, 37 miles an hour is not a great speed for a residential street of this nature, a curved street, street that connects to part of the Riverwalk along Word Avenue, which is where the speed radar sign had been placed. So like on many Waltham streets, residents were concerned about speeding. So at this meeting, I wasn't there, but I watched the recording that you had live streamed. Traffic engineer Mike Garvin proposed a set of speed cushions to be put on this section of Crescent Street. So a speed cushion it's not a speed bump, so it's not like a little speed bump that you would see like in a parking lot. It's not like a raised table or a raised crosswalk, or more gradual feature that you see at the rail trail. So on Hammond Street, Bacon Street, and Lyman Street that have been there for the last year or so when the rail trail opened. The speed cushion is kind of like a rubbery device that can be put on the street. It will slow drivers down. It's going to make a loud noise if you go over it too fast. I don't think I've ever actually driven over one. I've definitely driven over speed bumps and the speed tables on the rail trail. So I actually don't know how effective they are at actually slowing you down. Like the raised tables on the rail trail, if you go over those at 40 miles an hour, you're going to have problems on your car. These speed cushions, I actually don't know like how much damage they'll even do, other than just being uncomfortable to go over fast. So I don't even know how effective they actually are at slowing drivers down.
And they'd be removing them during the winter months, so
and-
they wouldn't be there at all.
Yeah, and because the snowplow blades would basically lift them up, then they would only be there seasonally, so not during the winter months, so when it could snow. Of course, we haven't really had much snow the last 2 winters. I think we've had maybe like 4 snow emergencies, give or take, the past 2 winters combined. But these would only be in place, let's say from April through December, give or take. So it's already a pretty watered down attempt at traffic calming to begin with. Okay, they're seasonal, like only 3 seasons a year. They're not as effective probably as actual permanent measures that you see in Waltham along the rail trail and in other places like in Somerville, for example, near Tufts on Powderhouse Boulevard has a bunch of these that were put in place over the last couple of years. Boston is on a speed hump blitz to install several hundred of them over the next couple of years. Mike Garvin at the traffic commission meeting gave his proposal, okay, that the city would buy, I think just a pair, like I think they would just be put on one northbound, one southbound. Like it's not even a series of these. Right away, Fire Chief Mullen came out and was like, I am opposed to traffic calming measures. Every second counts when responding to an emergency. These are going to slow my vehicles. Apparently, Mike Garvin said they do have strategically placed cutouts, because I guess fire trucks have a slightly different wheelbase distance between the wheels than a normal passenger car does. So a fire truck, if aligned correctly, would be able to go through them without really being raised up, as opposed to a passenger car that at least one set of tires would be going over it. But regardless, that didn't really allay Fire Chief Mullen's concerns. There's a Waltham Times article where he had sent the reporters an email saying pretty much I oppose all traffic calming measures except for like enforcement, signs, and like paint on the street, which is not traffic calming by definition. Traffic calming is physical measures added to the street.
Right. Chief Mullen.
Okay, so everybody on this commission knows my feeling about speed bumps, and it's no different on this one. The first new engine that's in this area did 1,200 runs last year. Every minute of response counts. And any time that we're impeding that response, I am against. Respectfully to the councilor, every north-south major roadway in this city was blocked before I was on this traffic commission, and I believe that Chief McGinnis voted against them. Every single north-south transversion is now impeded for fire apparatus going through. We have to slow down. These trucks are big. We have to slow down a lot farther than a car. That's why I'm against it.
So long story short, someone, I don't know if it was Mullen or someone else in the commission, we'd have to rewatch the recording, introduced a motion to just table the decision. So to not vote on installing these, purchasing these speed cushions now. That motion actually passed. And then Chief City Clerk Joe Vizard went into this pretty much impassioned.
You all set?
I am against this for the impact on fire response. I would like to table it, though, to hear what Chief O'Connell has to say about it in terms of police response.
Okay, we got a motion that's been seconded, so you'd have to hold off on that table.
That's a superseding motion, so he's got a superseding motion that is not debatable, so we have to vote on that right now.
Okay. Can't get to you then. I'll take a vote.
Talk about how everyone knows Waltham is falling behind other neighboring cities in traffic calming. Other cities are doing this. Okay, why is Waltham special? This is kind of very similar to what Councilor Logan talked about last month with that 48 Pine crosswalk. It's like other cities doing this. Why can't Waltham? He got very vocal, Joe Vizard, talking about the rail trail crossings. It's like, it slows me down. It's like, where are you that you have to go 40 miles an hour on Lyman Street? When he finished this, the whole corner of the whole half of the council chambers where there were several Ward 8 constituents, I was seated also during this part of the meeting, burst into a round of applause. I don't recall ever hearing a round of applause at a traffic commission meeting.
For some period of time. If it doesn't work, if it's horrible, we can take it out. It's not even permanent. We're not using pavement. We're not using anything else. We use pavement, and we have the ones at the rail trail. I don't even notice them anymore. I don't know if anyone else does. I slow down. I stop. Oh, well, where do I have to go that I need to be going 30 or 40 miles an hour down Lyman Street, and I will do it without the bump. Okay? I think that this is a sensible, reasonable measure. The traffic engineer has said he thinks it is as well. I think my motion was to vote in favor of it, but we can continue to talk about it if we want.
Seconded. Motion made and seconded. Everybody all set? Mr. Gavin. Couple questions, Mr. Gavin.
So Vizard introduced a motion to purchase these as a pilot program starting in April, I think April 15th, he said. And that motion ended up being voted on, being passed. I think it was a 4-2 vote. Police Chief O'Connell, who normally chairs the commission, was not present at last Thursday's traffic commission meeting. As I understand it, Mike Garvin is going to be putting a request in for funding to the mayor to purchase as a pilot a pair, I think 2 of these speed cushions, and then like all appropriation requests, those would go before the council. I assume the mayor would have the opportunity to pretty much kill this right away and not introduce the funding request to the council if he felt that this was not warranted. But as I understand it, it will be coming before the council at some point in the near future, sometime before the spring, to purchase these and then to have them in place by the middle of April. So we will see how that goes. One interesting thing about traffic calming about the Fire Chief Mullen's opposition to this. So if you look at the section of Crescent Street in question between the northern arc, there's street parking allowed on both sides. Okay, so if fire trucks are rushing to a call, and he threw out a number of 1,200 calls I don't know if it's from just the Moody Street Fire Station. I don't know exactly what that number is based on, like if it's 1,200 calls from the Moody Street Fire Station that went along Crescent Street, or 1,200 calls on the south side. Like maybe the Prospect Street station also, but he threw out a number of my crew went on 1,200 calls the past year. What is the biggest physical object that blocks emergency vehicle response? Okay, it's other cars on the road. Treasurer Magno was very concerned about 6,000 drivers. He says that use Crescent Street each day. Where are they going to go? Because he feels like that some of these drivers will not want to go over these speed cushions, so they might divert to Adams Street or Lowell Street or Moody Street. Well, if you're not driving 40 miles an hour, you shouldn't be affected by these speed cushions in the first place. But in typical Treasurer Magno fashion, he seemed a lot more concerned about the plight of 6,000 drivers that are going through the neighborhood, as opposed to the concerns of 6, 7, 8,000 people that live in the neighborhood. Like if you're driving the speed limit, if you're driving 25 miles an hour, which is what these speed cushions are supposed to be enforcing drivers to do, then you shouldn't have any need to divert to other streets.
And I guess true to form, he wasn't asking where these car drivers were going or why were they there.
Yes, unlike the several members of the commission last month that were wondering about where the residents of 48 Pine were going to have to cross mid-block, there was no discussion about where are these drivers going. Are they Waltham residents? Are they just passing from Lexington down to Newton, or from Belmont down to Newton? It was just, there are 6,000 cars on this road every day. Where are they going to go if there are speed cushions put in place? Well, they're not going to go anywhere. They're going to stay on that street. But getting back to, again, cars being an impediment to emergency response, you have parking on both sides of the street. It's like if Mullen were so concerned about emergency response, well, maybe he should advocate for getting rid of street parking. Imagine if we had like dedicated emergency lanes in place of that street parking. But that's never going to happen here, because just parking is a just sacred thing.
Also related to the response times, if I can get into it too, with you mentioned how many calls like they were doing with they required a fire engine going out. And that kind of, to me, not to be like nickel and diming fire response, but like these big fire engines aren't necessarily meant to do a ton of wear and tear. Like it's expensive, and the more you drive them, the more you have to maintain them. They get like 2 miles to the gallon. Like it's a lot of like gas to be driving out everywhere.
We'll put a link in Not Just Bikes, like this urbanism YouTube channel did a video a few months ago on how fire departments are like causing death on Americans, North America, not just the US, but Canada too, where you have these oversized vehicles compared to their counterparts in many European cities, many Asian cities, that are pretty much jack of all trades, that are not just responding to fires, but are responding to car crashes, which happen a lot more frequently than smoke and fire calls do, that are responding to heart attacks. Like if someone falls on the street, this happened, I witnessed this actually about a year or two ago. I was walking on Main Street near the library, and a woman fell and was bleeding pretty badly. I called 911, bystanders came, helped, and at least 2 full fire trucks responded, as is pretty typical in a medical emergency that has nothing to do with smoke or fire. It's often fire trucks that are responding. So these massive vehicles going down your street, how much of that Waltham has control over? I mean, that's part of, I mean, we do have ambulances. There's one based right off of Parmenter Road. But it's just a thing in North American cities that these monstrous fire trucks are responding to every emergency call.
And so some American cities are actually running like what they'll call sprint cars, where they'll have like a captain and a paramedic in a like a SUV or something driving to the thing, and if they need a fire engine there, they'll call a fire engine there. And it just seems like basic triage. That's kind of what I was getting at. and things like that, where it's like, okay, now all of our road infrastructure has to take into account what's the minimum time that a fire engine could get through times the number of calls they're making. Like that seems like we're suddenly like just gonna be bloating everything.
Yeah, and another thing that Mullen threw out there, so based off of a little diagram that Mike Garvin had put together of what these cushions would look like, because the traffic commission doesn't share the informational packet that all of the members see every month, unlike other cities like Watertown, or I think Newton like puts the whole like whatever their corresponding body is called, like the whole PDF is online that you can view. But I guess the diagram seemed to indicate that fire trucks would have to like swerve into the opposing lane to like not go over them, and Mullen was very concerned about that. Even though that's how fire trucks get around traffic, typically they swerve into the other lane. Like if a lane is only wide enough for one car, you have drivers are going to be kind of going to the side, and the truck's going to be going down like the opposing lane anyway.
Mr. Garvin, I'm just looking at a picture here. I'm not familiar with this. It looks like the fire apparatus has to travel into the middle of the street to transverse this. Therefore, I'll have to go into oncoming traffic.
I mean, the photo that's on that you're looking at may not be exactly where we placed this particular speed cushion. We would place it so the fire truck could straddle the device with, you know, a wider wheel base, I guess, that a car couldn't avoid it, but a fire truck could without crossing the yellow line.
Police and fire chiefs in general just have a stereotype of being very opposed to anything that would slow drivers down, even though, again, car crashes are some of the biggest things that they respond to. But if all goes as planned, these will be coming to Crescent Street sometime this coming April. And we'll be there until next winter comes. I don't know what metric is going to be used. I assume one of them will be a speed study. So are these actually effective in slowing drivers down? Getting back to that radar sign that was placed, I think, on Ward Avenue and Crescent Street. One of the findings from earlier in the year was that initially the city put it up, but it didn't show you your speed. It was just recording speeds. And then they did that for like 30 days. And then they turned on the sign that showed drivers their speeds. And the 85th percentile speed, I think, actually went up like about 0.2 miles an hour. Showing drivers their speed had no effect on slowing them down.
It had a negative effect. That's too funny.
Yeah, so it's within the margin of error of whatever the accuracy of those devices is. And that's to be expected. I mean, yeah, like you have a long street, you see the sign, yeah, you might just slow down briefly, and then you're just going to speed up right away. It just goes to show you like signs, police enforcement, paint are not effective traffic calming measures. If you want to slow down drivers, you need to physically make going fast, A, uncomfortable, and B, potentially dangerous, where
Also,
it will cause damage to the driver's car by going too fast.
and also, you had mentioned that one of the things that was thrown up, I believe, Magno, about like, well, where are these drivers going to go if suddenly Crescent Street has traffic calming? They're going to go down Lowell Street. Well, Lowell Street is also getting traffic calming.
Eventually, yeah, those flex posts should be coming out pretty soon. They're seasonal also. One thing Cavian Harris did mention at the very beginning of this was she asked the commission, these speed humps have been in place along the rail trail for about a year now. Again, not on Lexington Street, but on Middlesex Circle, Lyman Street, Bacon Street, Hammond Street, Prospect Hill Road. And she asked, as far as you know, has there been a problem in emergency response? No one, Mullen didn't say yes, didn't say no. One thing that Bob Waters, the acting planning director, did say was it has prevented him from hitting people a couple of times. Like they really do slow you down on Lyman Street and the other streets. Again, we'll see. Coming soon in 5 months or 4 months. We'll see how much snow we actually get this winter, if any. but that was the main kind of contentious issue of the traffic commission that met last week. One other thing that was supposed to be the highlight of this traffic commission was the presentation by the engineering firm of the Moody Street pedestrianization study that we alluded to a bit in our last debrief last month. So this was the 400 or so page PDF that's on the city planning website under plans and reports. Again, about 60 pages of that is actual text and imagery. The rest is traffic data. The engineering firm was supposed to be presenting that. I don't know if I assume they were actually in attendance. I had to leave the meeting before this came up because 10 a.m. on a Thursday is a very inconvenient time for people that are working. But watching the video afterwards, it seems that the mayor wants to hold one or a series of public input sessions that was part of this document. This was always going to be part of the plan that the public would have the chance to weigh in. So Bob Waters' department is supposed to be setting that up on the planning department. So don't yet know if those have been scheduled. The mayor was adamant that it be a large venue with sufficient parking and microphones and cable TV access. So I assume that's going to mean the government center building on School and Lexington Street.
I have a feeling it will be.
Yeah. Because there's now sufficient parking because we bought the former Elks building across the street where the farmer's market is held.
Between that and the central lot, we have our cup run at the over.
Yeah. How these sessions are going to be any different than the ones that were held in 2021, 22, and maybe last year also, 2023. I don't know. It's going to be the same people saying the same things, the same nail salon and dollar store owners and barbershop owners saying customers must be able to park right in front, and other people saying we don't need that much traffic on Moody Street. Let's make it more of a pleasant environment. So to be determined when these will be held and how different they're actually going to be than previous sessions and how much they're actually going to sway whoever makes the final decision. I assume it's the traffic commission that ultimately at some point will vote on whoever to make any change to Moody Street. And if so, what kind of change is it going to be? Is it going to be full pedestrianization or one-way northbound travel that the report did recommend that we discussed a bit last month? Stay tuned for information, for details about when those sessions will be held.
Cool. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Saul, for the updates, and we will be joining you next month for another episode of 781 News Debrief.
Okay.
Bye, all.
Take care.